So welcome to Angel Sunday. In case you're wondering how it is that you have never heard of the great church holiday, Angel Sunday, that's because we just made it up. We being me and Leah, who just sang that beautiful song. You know that one of the things we like to do during the summer is to feature special art up here at the front of the church. And as you heard me tell the kids earlier, today's art is these two beautiful and very old Italian angels gracing our chancel, brought to us by Leah. Earlier this summer, Leah said, on the Sunday I bring the angels, I can also sing about angels. And I said, well, then I'll preach about angels. So Leah and I, we declare it to be Angel Sunday, which means that my task this past week was to pick a Bible story about angels for me to preach on. And the story that Kim just read is one of my favorites. The angel in this story doesn't get as many biblical headlines as, say, the angel Gabriel, but what I love about this story is that it's actually the story of all of us at some point in our lives, and it's a reminder of what God does for us then. So the story she read is known as the story of Elijah and the angel in the wilderness, but you have to know the backstory first to understand this story. So here it is. Elijah was a great and mighty prophet of God, pretty much the gold standard of Old Testament prophets. He was a mighty preacher and a compassionate healer, and he was an impressive worker of miracles too. Well, I say impressive, but the one person who was not the least bit impressed by Elijah was, unfortunately, the very powerful queen of Israel, a not very pleasant woman named Jezebel. Jezebel didn't believe in Elijah's God. She was quite committed to the gods that she'd grown up with in another country. The king of Israel, however, Jezebel's husband, was a fan of Elijah. So in one of the more bizarre plots of the Old Testament, the king and queen decide to have a battle of the priests. Survivor, Hunger Games, last one standing, that kind of thing. It's Elijah versus the priests of Baal, Jezebel's religion. And the deal was that whoever could get their god to come down and start a fire on the altar, they'd be the big winners. And the other guys would be, well, toast. So Elijah and his God get the fire going first. So Elijah is the winning priest, and therefore his God is declared to be the real God. And in theory, this should be the pinnacle of success for Elijah. He should be on top of the world. But things fall apart really quickly. Queen Jezebel does not like losing, and Elijah ends up having to hightail it out of town, running for his life from one infuriated royal. Think Queen Elizabeth sicking her corgis on you, only way, way worse. So out in the wilderness, running for his life, Elijah runs out of everything, food and water, yes, but also energy and hope and faith. He had done everything right, he thought, but now nothing's going right, and he is just done. He's exhausted. He is at the lowest of low ebbs, and the story says, as you heard from Kim, the story says that he collapses under a tree and says to God, I'm done, and falls asleep. And this is where the angel comes in. And this is where the story becomes not just a great angel story, but to me, one of the more important stories in the Bible. God sends an angel to Elijah. There's a little tap on his shoulder while he's sleeping, and he opens his eyes and he looks, and there's an angel there with bread and water. And the angel says, get up and eat, Elijah, or this journey will be too much for you. And so he does. And it's just what he needed. Last Saturday morning, was the Connecticut Challenge, an amazing bike ride involving hundreds of cyclists, many from this church, and many more hundreds of volunteers, again from this church. It was started by our own Jeff Keith many years ago to raise not just awareness of what people go through when they're treated for cancer, but also the funds to support them in that journey. And if you drove by church that Saturday morning, you saw tents out there and you heard a band and you saw tons of people because This church was a rest stop for the bicyclists, a place where they could hop off their bikes on their 25-mile ride, their 50-mile ride, their 100-mile ride, and rest their aching legs and their behinds for a bit and get some refreshment. So I hung out here for a long while and watched as many friends rode in, some pretty tuckered out. And I saw them thankfully accept a cup of water and a banana and a shady place to rest. And when the soreness had left their legs at least a little bit and the bananas had hit the spot and the hydration had kicked in, they'd say, "All right, Alida, I'm heading out. I am ready for those last 10 miles now." And off they'd go. That's pretty much exactly what God's angel provides to Elijah in this story, a rest stop, minus the porta potties. When Elijah is at his lowest, when he really doesn't think he wants to go any further, can't go any further, that's when God provides a rest stop. That's when God's angel shows up in the wilderness and says, "Hey, here's water. Here's some bread. I know you need it. Let's get you going again." And he does. Elijah does get going again. He heads out for his next 10 miles and beyond, renewed and ready to be God's voice again. So here's why I think this little angel story is so important. Because everyone, all of us, at some point find ourselves worn out, tuckered out. Everyone has wildernesses. Some of them are pretty big wildernesses. A relationship ends, or a job is lost, or grief brings you to your knees. What should have been won't be after all. But there are smaller wildernesses too, times when you just seem to lose your oomph, or when the headlines really get to you. And that's when God shows up. A God who knows when we need a rest stop. A God who sends an angel in to say, "Here's some bread for the journey. I'm going to get you through this." This past spring at one of our high school youth group meetings, SPF, we had a visitor stop by unexpectedly. His name was Matthew. And 15 years ago, he was one of our most faithful SPF attenders. And 15 years ago, his life was a bit of a mess. And Matt came by this spring to talk to the kids about that and to give them a little window into what he'd been then and how he is now. And how he is now, by the way, is awesome, happy, working, fulfilled, in love. And Matt wanted to let the high school kids of today know what SPF had been for him, what this church had been for him. He told them that it had been his respite, the place where he had found bread for the journey and refreshment in the wilderness. You might not realize it now, he told them, but just to have a place where you're always welcome and where you can kind of just drop your act and be yourself, that's incredible, and you need it more than you know. Coming here every week, he said, was one of the things that helped me keep going when life was really rough. For Matt, the angel he met came in the form of the smiling faces here who made him feel loved. Just like it was for all those bicyclists, his rest stop was at the top of this hill, but the rest and renewal that he needed was something different. Bread for the journey, a cup of cold water when the way ahead was hard. God's presence, in other words. God's presence as real to him as it was to Elijah on that day long ago. And so it can be for us, for any of us. Whatever hard place we find ourselves in, whenever that may come, we are not there alone, and we are not left there for long. There is the touch of an angel on our shoulder and a voice that whispers, "Get up and eat. There is bread for the journey." But Matt's story also reminds me that we ourselves are sometimes the angel in the wilderness for someone else. We ourselves may be the presence of God to another. After all, the angel that Matt met here, the angels, that was you, this church. And who knows when you may spot someone in a wilderness? Who knows when you might be the one who is able to offer bread for the journey and a cup of cold water for the soul? 5 years ago this weekend, there was a story all over the national papers, a story about an angel sighting. You may remember it. The story was this. On a highway in Missouri, there had been a horrific car accident, and a 19-year-old girl named Katie had been trapped behind the steering wheel of her car, critically injured. Emergency workers struggled for an hour to extricate her from the twisted metal, and while they were doing that, Katie's vital signs were beginning to fail. And from what seemed like nowhere, a man stepped forward wearing a priest's collar, and he went to Katie and gently anointed her with oil. He actually reached in through the sunroof and touched her forehead and began to pray out loud with her and for her. And her vital signs started to improve, and the emergency workers were suddenly able to get her out, and the ambulance rushed her off to a hospital, and then everyone turned around to thank this priest, and he was gone. And the next day, wanting to find this guy and thank him, the fire chief who had overseen the accident scene went through all 69 photos taken at the scene, and there was no priest in any of them. And they checked the local churches, but none of those clergy had been at the accident. And someone said, it must have been an angel. And the headlines in USA Today were these: Angel priest visits accident scene. Mystery priest who suddenly appeared is being called an angel. 5 days later, a priest who worked 100 miles away as a prison chaplain told one of his fellow chaplains about a car accident that he had come across in another part of the state and how he'd stopped to help. "Wait, you're the mystery angel," his friend said. "Do you know how hard they've been looking for you?" And what was interesting to me, after Reverend Patrick Dowling stepped forward, what was fascinating was how disappointed people were to find out that he was human. He wasn't an angel after all, the papers reported, and across the country, people sighed. But wasn't he? Wasn't he an angel? He was the very presence of God to a terrified teenager. He brought love and healing and prayer to a girl who was desperate for comfort. Last week, Katie Lentz was interviewed on a Christian radio station about the moment that her mystery angel turned out to be human. "Well, I wasn't disappointed," she said. "I was just so glad to see him again." And then she said this: "Psalm 37 says that the steps of a good person are guided by the Lord," she said. And isn't that what Father Dowling was doing? He was guided to me by the Lord. So who knows where the Lord might yet guide each one of us? Who knows what place we'll be called into to offer bread for someone's journey, a cup of cold water to renew someone's spirit, a prayer when it's needed. All we can know for sure is that sometime we will be called to be someone's angel, to meet someone in that same place where we ourselves have been met, in that place where there is a touch on our shoulder and a voice that whispers, "Get up and eat," in that place where our spirits are refreshed, and one there is to show us the way, the one who is love, the one who is rest for all our souls.